this one?
I read a lot of scary stories.
Liam, hello. First. Lord, hello. Hello. Rice, hello. How are you? How's everybody? Gonna watch some Mr. Bellin. Minecraft, hello. How's everybody?
But today's top story legitimately freaked me out. But before I get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest...
Muzaffer, I shall do that one soon. Wait, I already did that one, didn't I? Like the video? Thank you, Minecraft. Hello, by the way.
To you, please invite the like button to come out to dinner with you to a very fancy restaurant, order a ton of food, wolf it down, and before the check arrives, say you need to go to the bathroom, but just leave the restaurant. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's stories. In 1982, a very outdoorsy teenage girl and boy who had recently started dating decided to go camping in Maine. Around 1 a.m. on the first night they were there, the girl wakes up because she has to go to the bathroom, and she's about to unzip her tent when she stops because she hears some strange noises coming from outside their tent. It wasn't that loud, but it sounded distinctly like something was digging in the ground. But she really had to go, and she figured, you know what, it's probably just some small animal or something. And so she begins to unzip the tent, and there's a little bit of moonlight that night, and there was a clearing outside of their tent. So the moonlight's pouring through.
Wait, actually, I'm gonna do it the other way. Okay, yeah, so you guys can see better. Minecraft, I actually did that one. I did a video about it. But if you want, we can watch it again. I really like that one. Okay. Why this is doesn't make any sense. Hold on, I'm sorry. I don't know why it makes me do this. Okay. What is going on?
McDonald's is lying to you.
Jesus, it's loud. TikToks. Who's self-promoting? If you mean that's my Instagram. Ready. Sorry.
So she has plenty of illumination. And so she looks through this tiny hole and she can't believe what she sees. It is a grown woman squatting down about 2 or 3 feet away from their tent. Her back is to them, so she can't see that she's looking through the tent. And she's feverishly digging into the ground in front of her. The girl literally falls backwards into her tent. She's so startled by what she sees. And she lands on her boyfriend, who immediately gets up and he's like, "What's going on?" And she goes, "Shh." And she points at the little hole where she had unzipped the tent, and she goes, "Look." The boy is confused, but he can tell his girlfriend is very serious, so he sits up quietly and he looks through the little opening in the door, and he sees the digging woman. The boy recoils and looks at his girlfriend, and he's like, "What is going on out there?"
Well, this
is
the lady digging.
And she's telling him, "Don't do it." And he opens up the tent a little bit more, and he aims his flashlight directly on this woman. And this gets her attention, and she stops digging, and she stands up slowly, and she turns around and faces them, and she's got no expression. She's not giving them any indication why she's there. She's not acting aggressive. She's not acting scared. She's just completely neutral. And she stands there staring at them for quite a while before turning around and just walking away from their campsite. And after a little while, when they were pretty certain she was gone, they open their tent all the way, they go outside, they kind of scan around with their flashlights and she's nowhere to be found, and they go to where she was digging, and it's just this weird 4-inch deep hole in the ground. There's no rhyme or reason to why she was doing that. And so after sitting there wondering what they should do, they settled on, well, tomorrow we'll tell the park rangers that she was here and maybe they'll do something about it. And so feeling pretty confident that this woman's not going to come back, they both go back into the tent, they zip it shut, they get in their sleeping bags, and they're about to go to sleep.
Right?
And they hear someone
She's just
running
digging.
towards their campsite, and they know it's this woman. They immediately unzip the tent and they look out, and now the woman's not digging anymore. She's rumbling.
Well, I guess if it was like nighttime, then that's kind of scary. Alrighty, Muzaffar. I shall write it down.
Rummaging
Take a
through some
picture
of
of
their
it.
stuff that's outside of their tent. And the way she's doing it, they described as monkey-like. She'd pick something up, look at it, and throw it over her head.
Monkey-like.
Pick the next thing up, throw it over her head. Back and forth, just throwing things behind her. And so the boy gets out and he shines a light on her and goes, "You need to leave." And she doesn't react. She just keeps flipping through all their stuff until he gets pretty forceful and says, "You need to leave right now." And at that point, she kind of stops and looks at him like, "Huh, what are you doing here?" And then she gets up, turns around, and walks away. Now the couple really doesn't know what to do because she's clearly willing to come back after being confronted. But they stayed outside their tent for about 15 more minutes, shining their light and making lots of noise and treating her like she's an animal. And they're just trying to scare her away from the campsite.
Treating
After
her
a little
like
bit of
she's an
time, they
animal.
thought, okay, there's no way she comes back now because, we were pretty aggressive with her this time and she seemed to really get it. They both do go back in the tent, and as soon as they zip it shut, they hear her come running straight back to the site, like she was literally waiting in the wings for when they went back in the tent. And this
Jeez.
time she runs back to the hole in the ground, and she's just feverishly digging into the ground as fast as she can. And this time they come out of their tent and they're mad, and they are screaming at this woman to get the F out of here. What are you doing? And this seems to kind of frighten the woman, who gets up and she looks at them like, "Why are you yelling at me?" And she runs away, and it looked almost animalistic the way she was running away, like she was feral. The boy and the girl are totally shaken up at this point. It's about 1:30 in the morning, and this woman just keeps coming back to their site, and they don't know what to
She's
do about it.
obviously,
So they
like,
turn on some lanterns and they turn
not
on their
okay.
flashlights, and they decide we're just gonna stay
I don't think that was the actual picture of her.
outside until the morning. That way we know she doesn't come back and doesn't steal anything from us. But by about 3:30 in the morning, they've been outside for 2 hours. They're getting cold. They're super tired. The woman's nowhere to be found. And so they finally say, "You want to go back in and get some sleep? I think this time she's really gone." They get back in their sleeping bags and they go to sleep. They don't hear her again. The next morning when they get up and they unzip their tent, they look outside and all of their stuff has been thrown all over the campsite. And the hole in the ground that the woman had dug that was previously about 4 or 6 inches deep is now well over a foot deep. And they realize this woman must have been lurking in the shadows in the woods, watching them from 1:30 to 3:30 in the morning. That whole time they were out there kind of warding her off. She was just waiting, just watching them the whole time in the shadows. And as soon as they went into their tent, she must have given it a little bit of time, but then she ran right back over and she ransacked their site. But the strangest thing was, after they looked through all of the stuff she had chucked around, nothing was missing, and there was some pretty expensive stuff that was laying out that she could have taken but didn't. After they picked up their site, they went to the park ranger and they told them about what had happened, but the ranger has no idea what to make of it. He's never heard of such a thing. And so the couple just leaves that day because they're not about to spend another night here. And to this day, they have no idea why this woman was running onto their site and digging into the ground and rummaging through their stuff. It was like she was just a wild animal.
That's crazy. NF
In
Gaming,
2015,
hello, how
an
are you?
experienced outdoorsman named Bob, along with his wife, his young daughter, and their 2 German shepherds, decided to go
I have actually Minecraft. I did a video about it. His face is similar to Sylvester Stallone. Really?
camping in a remote part of northern Oregon. When they arrived at the site, Bob began setting up the big family tent for everyone to sleep in, and his daughter said, "Hey, do you mind if I sleep in the spare two-man tent that we always bring with us. Bob and his wife deliberated for a minute, but said, you know what, that's fine, but you gotta bring Guts. That's one of the German Shepherds. Guts needs to sleep with you.
Why
because
would
he's
you
gonna
name
be your
your
protector."
dog
So that
Guts?
night, after some s'mores around a campfire, Bob's daughter, along
Aw.
with Guts, retreat to their two-man tent, and Bob, his wife, and Leah, the other dog, retreat to their tent. That night, Bob wakes up suddenly to what sounds like footsteps outside of his tent. And he looks to his side, and his wife is still in the tent with him, and so is Leah, the other dog. And he listens really closely, and he can hear his daughter is snoring, and he can hear the sound of Guts breathing. So his whole family is accounted for, but he still hears these footsteps. And they don't sound like light little scampering sounds like you might expect from a squirrel or some small critter. They sound heavy, like a big creature is roaming around their campsite. But Bob's dogs are really keyed in to protecting their family, and since Guts and Leah are not up going crazy about whatever's out there, he figures, you know what, it's gotta be an elk or something, and it's not gonna do anything to us, so Bob ultimately just goes back to sleep. The next morning, Bob gets up, and everybody's just fine. There's no sign of any intruders
How
in
the
the
dogs not wake
campsite,
up?
and so that only confirms to him that, yup, it was just some harmless animal kind of
What's your favorite breed of dog? Probably a German. No, I like all dogs, but like bigger dogs. I used to have a German Shepherd mix, and yeah, Huskies are really cool too. What about you,
walking around the
Minecraft?
wilderness, because we're in a pretty remote area. That morning, they decide to go for a walk down the road that was right next to their campsite. And so they take the dogs, they start walking, and they make it a couple hundred feet down this road when all of a sudden Guts sees something or hears something and takes
Ryan,
off,
I actually
sprinting down
did the
road
third
and
one.
turns down this
I
little
just have to
access
post
road
it.
that branches off of the road they're on into the woods.
My
And
dog
Bob
would
is
still
thinking,
freak out
"Oh,
on
no,
an
there's a
elk, right?"
campsite down there, and this big German Shepherd's gonna bound up on them, and something bad's gonna happen. And so Bob, his heart's racing, he starts taking off after Guts. He goes down the access road, and he finds Guts stopped right outside of a campsite. But there doesn't appear to be anybody in the campsite. But there's a tent, there's a cooler, there's a table, there's all the things you would expect at a campsite, just no people.
I love
So
huskies,
Bob runs
yeah.
up and he grabs Guts and he yells out reflexively, "Hey,
You
I'm
have
really
dogs?
sorry, he's totally harmless. I don't know what he saw. Hey, we're leaving." But then before he leaves, he realizes on the tent there's this big scratch through it, like it's been cut open. And curiosity gets the better of him. And so he kind of walks up, keeping an eye out in case he's wrong and there are people still here. But as he gets closer, he realizes there's definitely no one here. This site is abandoned. Because he's looking around and all of their stuff has just been ransacked. There's scratch marks on everything, like animals have clearly come through here. And Bob, who is an avid outdoorsman, he knows how much some of their equipment cost. And he's thinking, why would anyone abandon this really expensive tent or this really expensive cooler? And as he's thinking about that, he turns and he sees there's a propane tank, a solid metal propane tank that has been completely flattened. But there's no tree that's fallen nearby. There's no source. There's no way that could have been flattened. So
This is why I won't go camping. Thank you, GFam. Overload, hello. I want a husky, but I have a cat. Well, cats are pretty cool too. Not me,
he's
hello.
definitely unsettled by this, but ultimately he decides, you know what? I'm going to take my family, go back to my campsite.
Cats are like
call the
fearless.
Park rangers, they can come down here and they can figure out what this is. Later that afternoon, Bob and his family are back at their campsite just a couple hundred feet away from this abandoned campsite. And at one
Would
point,
not
his
stay
wife
there.
gets up to go use the bathroom. She walks about 70 feet away behind a tree and she squats down. And then all of a sudden, she gets up and starts running back towards camp. And Bob sees this. He turns and sees her running towards him. At the same time, Guts gets up and starts sprinting towards her. And so Bob's thinking, what the heck is going on? Bob turns to his daughter and says, stay right here with Leah. And Bob gets up and starts running towards his wife. And Guts, at this point, has run to his wife and past his wife. Guts has run way into
Why
the
would you
woods.
leave?
And as Bob is running up to his wife, he's like, what's going on? Why are you running? What's going on? And she says, I don't know. I just had this horrible feeling someone was watching me. And when I turned, I already saw Guts running towards me and it scared me. And so that's why I'm here. And he's like, look, go with our daughter and with Leah. I'm going to see what's going on. And so his wife leaves and Bob draws his pistol.
Why
and he
doesn't-
starts walking out towards where Guts has now
Why aren't they leashed? Because something can happen to the dog.
stopped. Hair raised, growling, it's yapping and barking at something in front of it. And Bob's looking and he can't see anything. And finally, after not being able to
It's
figure out
rigged.
what the heck is going on, he just takes Guts and goes back to his campsite. When Bob got back to his campsite, he wanted to leave. and his wife wanted to leave. His daughter didn't really know what was going
Oh, I'm sorry, Minecraft. How long did you have the kitty?
on, but the attitude was, we want to leave. However,
Yeah,
it
it's
was getting
regret.
late, and they had a bunch of stuff they would need to pack up, and it was going to be a real ordeal trying to do that, especially without any light. So they decide, okay, we'll stay one more day, and we're going to leave first thing in the morning. In Bob's head, he's thinking, okay, I heard weird footsteps outside. You know, we have this abandoned campsite nearby that's been thrashed up in the flattened propane tank, and now my wife
Ari,
is
hello.
running away from something, and
Yes,
Gus
I'm
is
gonna
seeing strange
be doing
things in the
another
woods.
The
Like, there's a lot of
Do
weird
video.
stuff going on, and he
Is
decides
there any,
he's
like,
gonna set up
specific
a
one you want?
tripwire all the way around his campsite using a rope tied at about 8 inches off the ground, where along the rope would be little pieces of metal that would clang together, so if anything touched the rope, it would make the metallic clinking sound, then it would alert Bob that someone's here. And so Bob goes over to the edge of the site where there's an obvious starting point for this tripwire, and he bends down to tie the rope, and he realizes, oh my god, someone's already done this. There is another tripwire that's already been built around the outside of our campsite. It's
The
just
name?
been cut, it's been broken. Like, it doesn't work, but it's here. Someone else who was at this
Sorry. Do you have Asian hybrid blood, or is one of your parents Asian? No, I'm actually not Asian. Actually, well, I think my great grandma was Japanese, but I'm not sure. But both of my parents are from Central America, so yeah, I'm Hispanic. But we're all mixed, right? We're all mixed with that stuff.
campsite felt concerned enough about whatever was in the woods that they already had this idea. Bob didn't even tie his perimeter. He just drew his gun, told his family, get in the truck, and he stayed up all night protecting his family in the truck. As soon as the sun came up, they packed up and they got the heck out of there. Bob is convinced that there is something out there in the woods in northern Oregon that was walking around their campsite at night, that's scaring their dogs, that's stalking them basically and watching them from a distance. And probably whatever is out in the woods is the same thing that caused the previous group to set up their own tripwire. And it's also probably the
crazy.
reason the other campers at the other campsite were willing to abandon their nice equipment to get the heck out of there, because they are not messing with whatever the heck is out in those woods.
I liked his
In
Amigo
2004,
episode 2. He sings in that one. Oh, okay. I'll remember that.
Wildland firefighters were called in to a
What about you, Muzaffar? I have a friend with that name. Muzaffar.
forest in central Idaho to combat an emerging fire. By the time the crew
that's your
arrived at
last
this
name.
forest, it was clear this fire was spreading a lot faster than they anticipated. As a result, Mike, who was the assistant superintendent, basically the second in command of this particular crew, he said he was going to hop on the ATV and drive off way ahead of them to see if they needed to spread out farther to stop this fire. So Mike hops on an ATV and he takes off down this ancient looking logging road that probably hasn't seen a vehicle or a person in decades. Mike had made it about a half mile down this trail when he noticed out of the corner of his eye a bobcat was running perpendicular to him straight.
Yeah, at least one of them was like my great grandma or something. From Malaysia, okay, nice.
Straight out of the forest as if it was going to cross the road about 100 feet in front of him.
Thank
Mike
you,
comes to a
Minecraft.
stop and thinks, this bobcat doesn't know I'm here. It probably is not used to seeing people. It's going to come out into this trail, see me, get spooked, and run away. But instead, this bobcat runs directly into the middle of the road, turns, and faces Mike in a very aggressive posture. Mike is shocked at what he's seeing, because
Bobcats
he
are
knows
small, though.
bobcats are notoriously elusive and they're nocturnal. So for this thing to be out in the daytime and to be intentionally blocking his path and standing there aggressively like it's going to attack him was so out of the ordinary. So the two of them are just looking at each other, not moving for about 10 seconds until this bobcat opens its mouth and then begins screaming like a person. It did not seem like the right sound
What
for
the
what he
heck?
was looking at. He said more than scary, it was just intensely weird. And just as quickly as this bobcat has arrived, it stops screaming, turns and runs to a tree, sprints up the tree and climbs onto this branch that happens to be perched right over the trail he's on. And Mike's looking up at this bobcat that's right over this trail, and he knows if I'm going to continue going down this trail, I have to go under this screaming bobcat. Although totally freaked out, He knew he needed to keep going down this trail, and he's thinking to himself, you know what, this bobcat
I don't know,
is probably
people-
just
I just
scared of me,
started
and
it.
that was its reaction, as bizarre as it was. And so he throws his ATV in gear, and he starts slowly moving down the trail, the whole time keeping his eye on the bobcat, making sure it doesn't show any sign like it's going to leap off onto him. And as he got closer and closer, he just gunned it and sped underneath the branch, and luckily it didn't jump down on him. And as he got a little bit farther away, he turned up to look, and the bobcat had turned around and was still watching him very intently sitting on this branch. Mike makes it about another half mile down the road before he sees something else that's very strange. He sees a cabin. It's this little tiny cabin that's tucked away in the woods, and he's thinking to himself, I'm on federal land. There aren't supposed to be any private structures here. And he figures, even if this is illegal, I do need to stop and make sure no one's in there because there's this huge fire coming this way. And so he parks his ATV and he starts walking off the trail towards this cabin. And as he gets closer, he can tell it's not only a very old cabin, but it's almost certainly abandoned.
Right, that's what I was thinking of. Maybe it was that one. Oh, thank you, Minecraft. So nice of you.
Because he can see all these slats that have been put over all of the windows, like it's been boarded up. But when he got up close, he noticed something strange. The door itself into this cabin was not boarded up, and the doorknob was missing. And in its place was this shiny silver chain link that was thread through the opening where there should have been a doorknob around a wooden post that was right outside the door. Basically a makeshift lock because there was no doorknob to it. And he's thinking how weird it is that in the middle of this forest, on an old ancient logging road that clearly no one goes down, where bobcats are running around freely, that there would be this new chain here, which indicates someone must have been here recently. And so he bends down to look through the space that was still there from where the doorknob should have been, and he looks inside and he can't really see anything. And so he takes his flashlight and he shines it in, and he can't believe what he's looking at. There's all this furniture inside this tiny little cabin in the middle of nowhere, and it's all upside down. And he's just totally creeped out. So he puts his flashlight away and kind of backs up, and he starts walking back towards the road, and he can't help it, but the whole time he's looking over his shoulder back at the cabin, like someone's gonna emerge from outside of this cabin. He gets to the road, and by the time he's there, he's running. He jumps on his ATV, he whips it around, and he starts blazing back up the logging road back towards his crew. And when he turns the corner to where that bobcat was, he sees there is now a Native American woman standing in the middle of the path. She's
It was a skinwalker. It's 8:38 where I am. Who's up?
wearing this tattered white nightgown. She's barefoot, and she's standing in the same spot he saw that bobcat. And she's looking at him as if she's expecting him, like she's been tipped off that he's going to be here. And he stops about 100 feet away from her, and now he's officially freaked out. He's still
What
looking
time
over his
is it in the
shoulder
world?
towards that cabin, because now everything is just totally weird to him. And before he has a chance to do anything, this woman lets out a scream, a blood-curdling scream that is identical to the bobcat's scream. And so Mike is totally unnerved by this. Everything about this day has really gone sideways as this woman is screaming at the top of her lungs, and then suddenly she stops. Mike's still just standing there like, what's going on? And she runs to the same tree the bobcat had climbed earlier, and she climbs up this tree and gets onto the branch where the bobcat was and perches like an animal on the branch looking at Mike. And now, just like the bobcat,
what did
Mike
he ever
is
do
gonna
to
have
them?
drive right underneath this woman who is perched over the trail. And so he throws his ATV in gear and he starts driving, and he's staring at this woman, and now her mouth is just open like she's about to scream again. And as soon as he got close, he gunned it and went right underneath her. And he turned around after he got some distance away from her, and she's still on the branch, now turned around facing him as he drives away. He goes back, he tells the crew what he saw, and as much as they all want to go back and see this woman and see this cabin, they know they can't. They got to fight this fire. And so ultimately they do that, and then they leave. A couple of days later, Mike was in a bar in the town right near the forest they had just been in fighting that
It's 11:39 where you are? Oh, okay. This is why I don't leave my house. Oh my god.
fire. And Mike had seen the woman in the cabin, and he struck up a conversation with a local. And he said, hey, do you know of any buildings that are in that section of the forest? And the guy kind of laughed, and he was like, you know, the only building I ever heard of out there was apparently some cabin where some crazy lady thought of herself as a witch, and she apparently had a bobcat for a pet.
was a
And
witch.
So we as kids were just told to stay away from there. So besides that, I don't know. So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know in the comments what you thought
Oh,
of
thank
today's
you.
stories, and I will pin the best comment at the top of the
Okay.
comments section. If you enjoyed today's story and you haven't done this already, please invite the like button to come out to dinner with you at a very expensive restaurant, eat a ton of food, but before the bill gets there, say you're going to the bathroom and just leave the restaurant. Also, please subscribe.
That'd be terrible. That was crazy. Do you guys have any stories? I was confused as to like what a skinwalker was, but apparently it's like witches that can turn into animals. I hope to never see a bobcat in person. I mean, normal bobcats are fine. Usually, I guess, but that one was a little weird. Okay, another forest one. This is gonna make me not want to go to the forest. What about this one?
Every year, hundreds of people go missing under baffling conditions in the woods of North America. One former police
me
detective
neither.
named David Politis has investigated thousands
Bobcats
of these
are pretty
strange
small,
disappearances,
but, like,
and
the
he
one in
documents what he
Aussie Man.
finds in his incredible book series
The,
called Missing
wait, is this the one we
411.
watched?
Today, we're going to look at 3 cases from the Missing 411 that might shed a light on
Alright.
what's behind all these strange disappearances. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange,
Alright.
dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please go to the Like Button's house on a really hot day and ask them to get you a cold drink. While they're away, hide a large raw salmon in their While they're away, hide a large raw salmon. I can feel it. I can feel it coming on. While they're away, hide a large raw salmon in the AC vent. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. West Townshend is a rural area on the east side of Glastonbury Mountain in the American state of Vermont. This is significant because that places West Townshend in the so-called Bennington Triangle, which is apparently one of the most haunted places in America. The Triangle is a loosely defined area that encompasses the ghost town Glastonbury, which used to be a small logging community centered on the eponymous mountain in southwestern
BHLO.
Vermont. The town was abandoned at the end of the 19th century after the logging boom died down, so as a result, the greater Glastonbury area that West Townshend is certainly a part of is now untouched, pristine wilderness that even by Vermont standards is incredibly rugged and remote. The Triangle has earned its spooky reputation due in large part to the alarming number of unexplained disappearances that have occurred there over the last 100 years. Furthermore, over those 100 years, there have
Southeast
been
Asia?
dozens of
Oh, okay.
sightings of the so-called Bennington Monster, which is apparently this 8-foot-tall creature that roams the mountains of Glastonbury, and some people think that creature is behind many, if not all.
Well, I guess that's a good story, Ari. Martin, hello. I've done like so much big box, but I'll try to do
Of
another
these
one.
strange disappearances. On November 23rd,
Almost
1943, 37-year-old
Are you in the
Carl
East
Herrick
Coast,
and his
Minecraft?
cousin Henry decided to go to West Townshend to do some deer hunting. At some point during their hunt, the pair got separated, and Henry spent some time yelling for Carl and looking around for him, but he couldn't find him, and so he assumed he must have gone back to their camp. But when Henry got back to camp, it was empty, and Henry waited around for a little while for Carl, but he had this sinking feeling that something was wrong, and so relatively quickly, he left to get police. Police show up, they launch the search. For 3 days, they combed the entire area, and there was just not a sign of Carl anywhere. On the 3rd day, Henry discovered Carl's body. He was lying motionless face down in a clearing in the woods. Initially, Henry thought maybe he was still alive, so he ran over to him and rolled him over, and very quickly realized that no, Carl was deceased. However, there weren't any obvious injuries to Carl's body. He had some minor scratching on his arms and on his hands, but that was about it. Henry looked around the area and he found Carl's rifle that was loaded leaning up against a tree 70 feet away from where Carl was. Next to his rifle on the ground was an expended shell casing. Also, around Carl's body were apparently huge bear tracks. The official cause of death was baffling. Carl, apparently, was squeezed to death to the point where his rib broke and punctured his lung. So the theory became Carl must have been out here by himself. He encountered a black bear. He fired one shot at the black bear, thinking it was down, he walked over to check, and the bear attacked him and squeezed him and killed him.
Squeezed him?
But not so fast. If Carl encountered a black bear and fired one shot
Becton, thank you so much for being a member. Thank you, thank you. How are you?
into the animal based on the
I see
one
you.
found shell casing, that
It's
one shot is
4:45
not going to be
a.m.
enough to put that animal
Oh,
down.
okay.
Or very rarely is one shot
Thank you so
going to be
much,
enough to put
Vexen.
down
Thank
a
you.
black bear. And Carl, being a hunter, he would
Rick
know
and
that.
Carl
And
making
he'd want to keep some
appearances,
distance
right?
with his weapon up, aimed at the animal in case he needed to fire again. But even if Carl was really confident that one shot had taken the bear down, well, why would he risk his life by checking
Alien,
on the
how are
animal to
you?
make sure it's down without his gun? Why did he place it against a tree and then walk 70 feet
I'm
over
good,
to this
thank
animal
you.
that if it's not dead, it poses an enormous threat to you? You're all alone and unarmed with a huge bear that you've shot. No one's going to do that. You're going to carry your gun. But even if all of that happened, that Carl, unarmed, approached this bear thinking it was dead, but the bear's not dead. He's lying in wait and he leaps up and attacks Carl. Even if that happened, black bears don't squeeze people to death. They might scratch you and
Squeeze
bite you
people
and rip you to pieces, but they don't squeeze you to death. And Carl only had light scratching on his wrists and on his hands.
He got a
did
bear
not
hug.
have any signs of a traditional bear attack. So either this is the first time in the history of black bears that a black bear squeezed a person to death, or something else squeezed Carl. But what kind of an animal is, one, so strong it can squeeze a man's chest to the point where it breaks his ribs, and two, happens to be roaming around the Bennington Triangle? Makes you wonder.
What? That's where the term came from? Are you serious? That would make sense. Muzaffar, I think I did that one and I saw like the whole thing where Stitch comes out. Oh, you live in New
Ape
Jersey, my
Canyon is a
friend?
gorge on the
Thanks.
southeast portion of Mount St. Helens in the American state of Washington. The canyon is so named
I want
after
bear
a group
hugs.
of miners alleged that
Apparently not, because they're
ape men, aka Bigfoot,
super heavy,
attacked
but
their
I don't think
cabin
that's
there
what
in
killed the guy.
1924. And if you want to learn more about that specific event, I covered it on my YouTube channel in an earlier
Oh, you
video.
made it
It's
up.
right here. It's called
It makes
Scariest
sense,
Bigfoot
though.
Attacks, and I'll also include a link in the description. And while some people believe there are literally ape men running around this gorge on Mount St. Helens, there's never been a confirmed sighting. However,
Why can't
there
people, like,
was an
take a picture
event
of
in
these
1950 that forced the general public to come to terms with the idea that there could
Oh, really?
be ape men running
Bitches
around
from your
Ape
country?
Canyon,
That's
or at
cool.
least a large predator somewhere out there. In 1950, 32-year-old Jim Carter was a member of the National Ski Patrol at a ski area called the Milwaukee Bowl, which is in the state of Washington. Like everybody else on
I
the
know,
ski
right,
patrol,
Vexen?
Jim was a highly skilled skier
That
and
makes
mountaineer. In May of
sense.
that year, Jim was a part of a 20-person climbing party from Seattle, Washington. Their plan was to go to Mount St. Helens, hike up above the tree line, pick a spot, and then ski back down again. So the group arrives at Mount St. Helens, they hike up the mountain, they reach the spot where they want to ski down from, they sit down, they're putting their skis on, and Jim puts his on, and he says to the group, hey, why don't I ski down a little ways? I'll set up my camera on a tripod, and I'll take a picture of you guys as you pass, and then I'll follow you down to the bottom. And the group said, great, that sounds awesome. And Jim wanted to use his camera, so it was a win-win. So Jim, in full view of the entire group as they're getting ready, he skis down a little ways and then turns left into an area called Dog's Head, which was a little bit flatter than the area they were in, so probably a better spot to set up his tripod. But as soon as he turned left into that area, he was out of view of the main group. So after a few minutes, as the group is getting their stuff on, they took a
Martin,
little
thank
bit
you so
longer
much
because
for
they're trying to time it
subscribing.
so they all leave at the same time because they want to get this picture all at once. And so they take a little bit extra time, they're all ready, and then finally they head down and they make that left. They're going to pass by Dog's Head specifically so Jim can take their picture. But when they bank around the corner, Jim's not there. And so they're looking around and they're saying to each other, did he tell us he was going somewhere else? Because it seemed an awful lot like he was going to Dog's Head, but obviously he's not here. And so someone said, well, maybe he got annoyed with us because we were taking so long to get ready up there and he just already went to the bottom. And so they agreed that's what he did. And so they got back together again and they headed down to the bottom. But when they got to the bottom, Jim wasn't there. And so they sat there for a few extra minutes looking up at the mountain and they're they're kind of scanning down at the bottom and they're looking all over the place, but there's no sign of Jim. And so the group started to get really worried and they contacted authorities. When the first search team arrived, they went up to the area where the group thought Jim had been setting up at Dog's Head. And as they were looking around, all they could find was this discarded film box. So not any film or camera inside, just a box that would have held the film. It was kind of buried in the snow. Near this film box, they found Jim Carter's ski tracks, and they were not angled south towards the bottom of the mountain where the whole ski group had gone. They were angled east towards Ape Canyon. And they followed Jim's tracks, and they said they never deviated. They were total straight lines, like he was not trying to slow down. In fact, he was trying to go as fast as he possibly could. And at some point, he began leaping over these huge ice crevasses that if you mistimed, it's a death sentence. You're going into the crevasse. And he didn't just jump over one, he jumped over 2, 3, 4 at full speed without slowing down. And then his tracks got all the way to the edge where it overlooked Ape Canyon, and he went flying off. When the head of the search team saw this crazy ski line from Jim Carter, he said to the media that the only reason a guy like Jim, an expert skier who would never take risks like this, the only reason he would be skiing like this is if his life was in danger or if he was being pursued. So the search teams moved down into Ape Canyon, and for 5 days, 75 people combed the entirety of Ape Canyon up and back over and over and over again. They never found Jim, and they never found his skis or his camera or anything. And the whole time they were looking, those 75 searchers would report that anytime they were alone, they had the distinct feeling they were being watched. And it got so uncomfortable for many of them that they refused to go back into the gorge unless they had someone right next to them. After those 5 days of searching almost exclusively inside of Ape Canyon, they spent another 5 days not only continuing to search Ape Canyon, but also the surrounding areas. And finally, after 10 days of finding no trace of Jim Carter, the search was terminated. The only rational thing investigators could point to as the reason behind why this happened to Jim was he was diabetic and he had forgotten his insulin that day. So perhaps he became hypoglycemic and he became confused and then managed to ski off the cliff into Ape Canyon where
people make up some weird stuff. Oh my gosh. It's getting better. What about you, Musafir? Why would they just leave without their friend? Because they thought that he went down, unfortunately. Along, hello, how are you? Do they not carry firearms when searching areas with possibly dangerous animals? I'm not sure, Vexen, but that would be a better idea. Arya? I'm sorry, I can't say your name. But hello. Boring.
he landed in such a way that he remained hidden. Or, like the head of the search party seems to think, he was being pursued. He was skiing for his life. Whatever was chasing him had scared him so badly that he was skiing in a straight line down a cliff, jumping over ice crevasses before falling into Ape Canyon. And then presumably whatever forced him off the edge went down and scooped him up and took him away, and that's why they couldn't find him. But unless someone finds his body or finds some other piece of compelling evidence, we will probably never know for sure what happened to Jim Carter.
It's terrible.
Somewhere out in the Sierra Nevada mountain range lies a small hunting camp that's been there since
they were
the 1950s.
trying to ski, but
despite its fame, only a handful of people know exactly where this camp is. But even if you were given explicit directions on how to get there, you might just walk past it because it's tucked away in the middle of the woods up on this mountain. It's just a small fire pit, a couple of logs around it,
don't go
another log set up for cutting wood, and there's some paths that have been beaten down over the years from its occupants, but it's pretty much unremarkable. According to camp members, the fastest way to get to the site is by horseback, and it's approximately 8 miles, and it's through very rugged terrain on this mountain, and it includes a
like a ravine you would see in Minecraft, but not that large of an opening. Minecraft? I don't know. I don't know.
4,000-foot elevation.
I've never played
However,
Minecraft,
this 8-mile trail is not marked, and every year it changes slightly because trees will fall along the way, changing the topography. Ron Moorhead, who's one of the 4 original camp members, laments the fact that anybody knows anything about this campsite. He wishes they could have kept it a secret, but he knew that wasn't an option after what they discovered there in late 1971. In early 1971, Ron was a young man, and he was invited out for the first time to the Sierra camp by the 3 founding members. When Ron got there, he fell in love. It was this beautiful natural, pristine wilderness that overlook this
Sorry,
amazing
Vexen.
valley, and they're surrounded by these huge white fir trees. There's a freshwater stream that trickled by, and in terms of hunting, the deer were plentiful. Ron said this campsite was the closest to heaven he thinks he'll ever get. The only real drawback of the site was the large bear population, but they always had guns on them, and they built this shelter out of heavy fallen timbers that they could go inside, shut the door, and they'd be protected from the bears until they left. When there wasn't a bear threat, they slept on the ground in tents. In late 1971, Ron came back to the camp with the other 3 founding members. They'd had a great day of hunting, and they were standing around the campfire just chatting with each other when they started hearing a grunting sound not far away from them in the forest. Now, typically, whenever a bear came to their campsite, it was usually at night, and they would hear it grunting somewhere off in the forest.
I think from Reddit along, or like people submitted.
As soon as they heard it, they would stop and they would listen to kind of confirm it was a bear. And if it was, they would go inside of their shelter and they would wait for it to leave. But this time, when they stopped to listen to confirm it was a bear, the sound they heard next was something they had never heard before. And it was so frightening, they almost fell over each other running to get inside of the shelter. It was like a whoop.
Thank you for becoming a member. What's the story, Turtle? Walking storybook is right.
Whooping sound
Thank
you would
you,
expect from an
G-Fam.
ape, except instead of
Everybody,
a series of whoops
subscribe
like
to
you would
G-Fam.
expect from an ape,
He's
it was
awesome.
one
There's
loud
reactions
whoop,
too.
and then silence, and then another creature somewhere else made a responding whoop that sounded different than the first. There was at least 2 creatures that were basically speaking to each other out in the forest,
Oh
out
my
of view.
God.
Ron would say, as these creatures were howling and whooping at each other out in the forest,
They're whooping.
the men were huddled around inside of the shelter looking at each other like, what is that? Has anybody heard that sound before? And nobody knew what it was. And after a little while, they heard these creatures running towards the camp. They were pretty well off, but they heard these heavy footsteps approaching. And so Ron and the others, they put themselves up against these slats inside of the shelter where they could look out in the direction where these creatures were. And they're staring out just past the light of their campfire into the dark forest. And they hear these things running, and they stop. They don't come into the clearing. It's like they're just outside of where they could see. And then their tone completely changes. These creatures, which are now one on one side of the camp and one on the other, begin speaking to each other in a language that almost sounds human, but it was nonsensical. It sounded like an imitation of a human language, but not human.
What
and so
the
Ron
heck?
and the others are terrified, and they're just staring through the slats, waiting to see this
Why does he
creature
look
that's
like
going to emerge
a
at some point,
caveman?
but it never does. Instead, the creatures continue to stay outside of the light, and they move around behind their shelter out of view. And so Ron and the others move to the very middle of their shelter to get as far away from the walls as they can, because there are breaks in the walls, and they're worried one of these things is going to reach through and grab them. But finally, after hours of these creatures running around the perimeter of their camp, communicating in this totally otherworldly language,
What the
they
heck?
started whooping again and ran off. And for the rest of the night, Ron and the other 3 stayed right in that shelter. The next day, when the sun came up, the men were out of that camp as fast as they could. These are hard, rugged men, and they were very shaken up by this experience. And they tried to talk about it, but there was just no way to describe what they were hearing and experiencing. And so they just decided they just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible, and they'll deal with this later. But as soon as they got out of the woods and back to their homes, they didn't talk about it anymore, except Ron became obsessed with whatever it was that was making that sound. He so desperately wanted to find out what it was. And so he convinced the other 3 members to come with him and go back to the campsite.
no.
Except this time, Ron was going to bring an audio recorder, and he was going to try to capture some audio of these creatures.
I really hope that they didn't die. I've never seen Mr. Ballin and Billy Ray Cyrus at the same place and time. Just saying. He doesn't look like him. A young Billy Ray. Walking Dead photos, right? Have you seen the rest of the Walking Dead, Rice? I didn't see it after the whole Negan killing everybody part. Does anyone play Mobile Legends? I do not. Yes, it's GFam. They were too stoned to speak. They were just asking for food. Imagine These are some like random
And so
people.
the four men went back to the campsite. They didn't even hunt that day. They stayed right near the campsite. They made this big fire, and they're all just kind of nervously sitting there waiting,
They don't
kind
have
of hoping it
flashlights?
happens and also hoping it doesn't happen. And at some point in the evening, Ron said he heard footsteps way out in the middle of the forest, and they sounded
heck?
like they were running towards the camp. The four men sprint inside the shelter, lock it behind them, and Ron turns on the audio recorder. Now, before you listen to this famous recording, here are its bona fides. After being recorded,
Wait,
Ron
what?
sent it to Dr. R. Lynn Curlin, who is a professor of electrical engineering at the University
Hear
of
this-
Wyoming, and he and his team analyzed it, and they concluded that one, it was unaltered, so it's not been edited, it's not been doctored in any way, it's an authentic audio recording. And two, whatever was making the sounds could not have been a man, because their vocal range was dramatically higher and lower than that of a human's. The doctor said, based
I
on
guess it
average
wasn't a
pitch
stone
and path
person.
length, the creature that was making the sound most likely was between 7'3" and 8 feet tall. In addition to the Dr.
you
Curlin
stop that nigga,
examination,
you
a
keep
cryptolinguist
watching, trust me.
expert
Really?
named Scott Nelson
said they have guns,
also
why not
pointed
fire
out
some
that it would
shots,
have been
right?
nearly
Just
impossible
fire,
in
like, everywhere.
1971 for Ron or any of the other hunters to dub the sound of their voices, which are on the recording, over
What?
the
Why
sounds
alone?
that these creatures were making, because a couple times in the recording you hear both sets of voices happening at once. That's something you couldn't have done in 1971. Despite numerous attempts to debunk this recording, it still stands as a legitimate, unedited recording. Although what they were recording is still a mystery. Have a listen.
So nothing else makes that sound? Well, don't do that. Now it's gonna. What the heck?
There's two of them across the creek at the big rocks.
What the heck?
It's a hard act to follow.
I would literally die.
Yeah.
A heart attack. Oh my god.
Right there, I just seen movement right through there.
Shortly after this recording was made, Ron stopped hunting at this camp. However, over the years, he has gone back several times because he's obsessed with trying to find out what's out in the forest. But he says to this day,
It's E.T. That's what was making the noise.
he still has no idea. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's
Okay.
video,
Nothing
let
happens
us know in the comments
That's
what
good.
it is and where you found it. So give us the timestamp. If you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please
Let's see if anybody else found it. Oh yeah, he did. In every mountain, there must be a mysterious thing that maybe we don't know, whether it's a demon or something else that's considered a myth or folklore. Maybe there could be, who knows? Yeah, I think so too, especially like remote areas, like who knows? Right, it does sound like that, Rice, but I don't think there's monkeys in, where did he say that they were? Like, I don't know. But then they sound like they were talking. Sounds like a wolfy. But then, did you hear the other sounds? Hold on. What was it? Hold on, I'm gonna replay it for GFam too. Kitty lover, hello, hello, how are you? This guy is straight out of a horror movie. Okay, never mind. My friend Minecraft shared this to me. Oh, thank you, Minecraft. And thank you, Kitty, for coming. I'm telling you, give them all a Snickers bar. Right? It would have been funny if he would have been in that situation and kept narrating the situation. Right? You're not yourself when you get the munchies. They need Snickers. Imagine gave them some like chocolate or something, and they became your friend. That's crazy, like crazy stuff. I'm gonna save that one because I want GFam to hear it. But you guys have any other ones? This one was crazy too, the Egyptian one. Which one do you want? Family hunted by pack of unidentified creatures, or this one? What do you guys think?
Every year, hundreds.
Maybe you can react to our top horror film from our country. Definitely one of the most scariest movies I've ever watched. Munafik 2016. It would probably be copyrighted though, but I'll look it up. No more horror, please. I'm sorry, Along. Okay, one more. The Family Hunted. Okay.
When I was a kid, one of my favorite places to go in the whole world was my grandmother's house. She lived in South Paris, Maine. About 2,000 people lived there, totally rural, and there's lots of forests everywhere. We'd get to my grandmother's big farmhouse, and we'd just immediately go off into the woods.
Wait, was
behind
this
her
about
property
him?
Because it was like this vast expanse of wilderness. But as
Three
soon as it got
fights.
dark at night, we
That's
would all
horror
be quick
too.
to go back inside because there was huge animals that lived in the wilderness of Maine, and you just didn't want to be out there past dark. And at night, I'd be looking out at this dark forest from the safety of my room, and I would always be so scared that a set of eyes were going to look back at me from somewhere in this dark forest. Luckily, that never happened to me. It did happen to a family just north of my grandmother's house, and it wasn't just one set of eyes, it was 5. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious
Horror isn't
deliberative
my
story
thing, not
format,
afraid, but not
then you come to the right place,
interested.
because that's all I do, and I
No, you're
post 3,
afraid
4,
along. I'm
even
just kidding.
5 times every week. If that's of interest to you, then I would
Really?
encourage
Why?
you to waterboard the like button, and then subscribe to this
The only
channel
movie
and
I
turn
like
on
is
all
It.
notifications so you don't miss
It's
any
really
of
good
my weekly
movie.
uploads. Alright, let's get into today's story.
I think Mr. Ballin just makes these stories to protect whatever is hidden across USA.
In 2005, Eric
What do you
Martin
mean,
was
Mexico?
working at a paper mill in Maine, and he had been working at this paper mill for
Thank you.
20 years, and he was reaching up
My
to
God,
get
that's a
something on
lot.
the shelf when he threw his back out. And in
Hold
fact,
on. Look at the plate that he gave me. It's like way too much. It is amazing. It is.
he had slipped a
All right,
number of
back.
discs, and it ultimately meant he was not able to work anymore. He was going to be disabled. And so he's suddenly out of work. His wife, Shelly Martin, was not working at the time, but when he couldn't work, she needed to get a job. And so Shelly, who had not worked in a long time, was able, through some connections, to land a job in her hometown in Maine called Palmyra. Palmyra was a very small rural community. I mean, we're talking maybe 1,200 people that lived there. They also had a 17-year-old daughter named Chelsea who was not eager to go, but it was the only place they could afford, and so they had to go. Luckily, because Palmyra was such a cheap place to live relative to where they had been living, that for less money, they actually ended up getting a bigger piece of property than they had lived in before. It's this beautiful farmhouse that sat on a whole bunch of acreage, but it was
Alfredo,
incredibly
yeah.
isolated. You had to go down this bumpy
pasta.
access road to get to their long
Throw some over
driveway,
here.
and then once you were on the property, you'd look out, and it was just a full 60 degrees
Okay.
of very dense forest
I wish I
that
could.
virtually no one was in. There was no nature trails. It was just dark, dense forest.
It's not that
everywhere you
one,
looked.
kitty, but
So even though no one's that happy about
You
it,
can watch
they
that
end up
one
moving
too
into
if
this
you want.
farmhouse, and as they're unpacking their truck, Eric picks up one of his
So he's the one who hunts down people searching for Sasquatch for their stories. Who, Mr. Ballin? Blah. What is wrong with me? Mr. Ballin? Ever heard of, I'm not gonna try to pronounce that, also known as the Sea of Trees. Oh, Suicide Forest, yeah. Bet you'd find that interesting. That's just sad though, a lot of people commit suicide there. I know! He gave me cookies and Alfredo. That's this.
many rifles that he owned. Eric came from a long line
Yes,
of
Mr.
hunters.
Vaughn.
He
Okay,
loved to
thanks.
hunt. It was
Sorry.
his favorite thing to do, and he had a whole bunch of guns that he kept. And as he's carrying the rifle into the house, Shelley says, "Oh no, we're not keeping the guns in the house. You have a barn. You're gonna put
Maybe
your guns in
Cookie
there."
had you?
This had always been a point of contention for them in their marriage. Shelley just didn't feel safe having guns in the house, especially having kids in there. And so ultimately, Eric agrees, "Okay, fine. I won't put my guns in the house. I'll put them in the barn." And so he went in the barn, and he and his son, Sean, who he had come out to help him, they
He needs
built
content,
this gun
right? He
case
has
for
to
all his
go.
rifles. It's very heavy duty. They put it in the barn, and then they locked that, and then locked the barn itself. So they were totally secure in the barn, but definitely not readily accessible. Over that first year, Shelley and Eric developed this ritual where at the end of the day, they would go out on the front porch of their farmhouse and look out onto the front yard, and they would drink coffee. It was something they both looked forward to, and virtually
Vex
every
and
night
one
they did this.
Sulfredo.
And so almost exactly a year after moving in, it was in early 2000.
When we get teleporting stuff, I'll teleport you some Alfredo pasta. There's a movie about it. Oh, there is?
6, Shelley and Eric are sitting on their front porch, enjoying their coffee, they're chatting, and Shelley thinks she sees something in the woods. Now, you have to understand the layout and how far away they are from the woods to get a sense of what they were seeing. Right in front of their porch was a gravel road where they parked their cars. About 20 meters away from their house to the left is their barn. And beyond the barn, basically straight out from the porch, is this huge open field where there's no trees or anything. It was like open grazing area. And then way beyond the field was the beginning of this tree line, of this really dense forest. So we're talking at least a couple hundred meters away where she sees these lights. And she described it as
Wait,
like
light?
a pulsating light. It did not look like a car or some sort of vehicle, not to mention there was no road out
Aliens.
straight ahead from their porch. It was just a dense forest where there was absolutely no one that should have been in there. Eric immediately, when he sees the lights, he thinks there's a poacher on his property, someone illegally hunting on his
Yeah,
property.
true.
And so he gets Sean, his son.
This is
who
practically the same thing as the Skinwalker Ranch. I've seen it, Vexen. It was pretty good. I love a good doc. The movie's called Sea of Trees. It's really good. Really, I've never watched it.
not live with them, but was staying the night that night, he gets him to come outside and say, "Hey, do you think that's a poacher down there at the edge of our tree line?" And Sean's like, "I don't know, maybe." Eric decides that he wants to go tell this person to leave his property, and so he asks Sean to come with him. They figured they would just get to the edge of the property and yell out, "Hey, this is private property, you need to leave." As they're walking across the field and they're getting closer to the tree line, the lights, those pulsating lights, begin to fade and disappear back into the woods. And they get all the way up to the tree line and they can't see any lights at all. Even though at this point, standing on the edge of the forest, Eric and Sean are fairly confident that this poacher has left. They decide, just to be sure, let's walk a little ways into the woods. Even though it's totally dark, we're not going to get lost. We'll walk a little ways into the woods and just continue to yell, "This is private property," so they really do leave. And so they begin walking, and it's a very dense forest. Lots of low-hanging limbs. It's not somewhere that's easy to walk. There's no walking trails or anything like that. And they walk, 10, 15 meters into the woods, and then they hear what sounds like someone walking parallel to them, maybe 15 meters away from them on their left. And they both stop and they look. They didn't want to take any chance that they were being stalked by a predator. And so they thought, you know what? The lights are gone. I don't know what animal this is. Let's just get out of here. About a month goes by, and Nathan, who is Chelsea's boyfriend, was staying with the family at the farm. And it was the first nice spring day. I mean, it was a very dark and dreary winter. Maine winters tend to be that way. And so that weekend, Nathan and Chelsea decide, let's go walk around the woods. So they take the two family dogs and they start walking across that big field in front of the house into the forest, the same area where Sean and Eric have been looking for those lights and then heard what sounded like an animal that was near them. And so at first, Chelsea has the dogs on leashes, but they get to the forest and she lets them off their leash to let them go run around and go crazy because they've been cooped up because of the wintertime as well. The two dogs instantly take off running for about 100 meters, and then they come to a dead stop right outside this big mound. It looks like a dirt mound, but they get up close to it and they can tell that it's actually more like a den. There are these huge pieces of wood that have been leaned into like a lean-to type structure with moss and dirt and grass put all over the outside. I mean, it looks like a very intentionally made mound. And there's a circular hole that's been created right on the front of it. And the dogs have stopped right outside and they're poking their heads in and smelling into this hole. And Nathan and Chelsea are looking at this thinking, who did this? Is this like a hunter's?
If I had glasses, that would be me.
thing? Is this something a hunter might make? Would an animal
That's
make this?
literally
This
my
seems
mom.
really big for some animal to make this, but it
Sorry.
definitely was made
My
on
mom's always
purpose,
looking at
whatever
her
it is.
glasses,
And so
and
Nathan,
they're,
he
like,
just
on
kind of
her
looks down into this den, but it's totally dark, and he thinks
That's
he
funny.
hears growling coming from inside of the den. And so without any hesitation, he goes, "We gotta go. I don't know what's
Oh my
living in
God.
there, but we gotta go." And so they take the dogs, they put them back
Would
on
you guys
leashes,
look
and
inside?
the two of them get out of the forest as quickly as they can.
I don't
When
know.
Nathan and Chelsea came back to the house, they told Eric and Shelly, and actually Sean was there too, and they said, "Hey, we found this den of some kind out in the middle of the woods, basically straight out from your front porch." And that's when Eric and Sean said, "Well, about a month ago, we were out in that same area, and we could have sworn we heard some animal stalking us." A couple of months go by, and Eric and Shelly are sitting on their front porch having their coffee ritual, and there was just this low mist that kind of hung over the entire field.
More
And as
dumb
they're sitting there,
people.
they're commenting on how creepy it was. And what started as
That
just kind of a
growl.
friendly discussion about the general creepiness took a turn when they realized that they couldn't hear any wildlife. No crickets, no animals, no anything. And normally at night, because they were out here all the time, it was humming with life. And so Shelly had this high-powered flashlight that she always had out with her, and she starts scanning the property, not knowing what she's looking for, but it just seemed really odd that they couldn't hear any wildlife. But after she scans across the whole field, she doesn't see anything, and so she puts her flashlight down and just starts talking to Eric about whatever they normally talked about over coffee at night. Eric would say in numerous interviews that for whatever reason, when she put that flashlight down, he suddenly felt like they were in danger. He's looking out, he doesn't see anything, and then all of a sudden he just says, "You know what? We gotta go inside. I don't know what it is, but we gotta go inside." And Shelly's like, "Come on, I wanna stay out here for a little bit
Always
longer. We'll go in
listen
in
to
a few
your
minutes."
intuition.
And Eric stands up and he's like, "No, go inside." And he tries to grab her to kind of push her into the house. And she's kind of fighting against him. And then all of a sudden, Shelly stops. And she goes, "Did you hear that?" And Eric immediately knew that whatever it was, it's the reason he had that sudden feeling of being in danger. Eric turns
Why don't you listen to him, Shelly?
around and he can't see anything because it's too dark. Shelly grabs her flashlight and she begins scanning the tree line. And she gets to the field and gets about halfway across the field right in front of them, and she stops. Because right in the middle of the field are three creatures that look like wolves. These huge creatures that
Same
are looking
thing,
right
you
at
can
them.
walk
Two
around.
others join them. So there's 5 wolf-like creatures that are staring at them right from the middle of their field. She says to Eric, "What are those?" And Eric, who's an experienced hunter, he has no idea. He goes, "I think they're bears. They could be wolves. We gotta go inside." And so Shelly's just holding the light and they start charging directly at her so fast that she wasn't able to keep the light on them. They were already halfway across the field. They go inside, they shut the door, and they lock it. And without saying a word, the two of them make their rounds across the entire bottom floor, lock every window, close every blind, make sure everything is shut. There was something different about these 5 creatures. The way they started running towards them, it just felt like they were targeting Eric and Shelly. And so even after the house had been secured, they didn't feel safe. And so they're standing in the middle of their cabin, and Eric's saying, "My guns are in the barn. I can't. We have no protection."
Oh no.
And Shelly is like, "Whatever you do, do not go out there. We don't know what these are. Could be a bear, it could be a wolf. We don't know. Don't go out there." Shelly goes upstairs. She shuts off all the lights. She makes sure all the windows are shut. And then she goes to Chelsea's room, her daughter, and she wakes her up and she says, "Hey, come here. You got to look at this." And they go to the window and they kind of like poke their head into the window because they don't want to like totally open it up and stare out because they don't want the creatures to see them. But they're kind of poking their head out the window, and she's like, "Look." And standing on the gravel are these 5 creatures that are just standing in a row,
Why didn't they take a
looking
picture?
directly at the house. It was like they were waiting for them to come out the front door. They were just patiently standing there looking at the house. It did not look like normal animal behavior at all. And as she's looking, one of the animals looks up at Shelly in the window, and the creature stands on its 2 legs. It gets on its hind legs and looks at her, and Shelly gasps and falls over because the creature's like 8 feet tall.
Oh
and so
my
Shelly's
God.
on the ground looking at Chelsea, and she
Deadly,
can't believe what she
hello,
just
how are
saw.
you?
It's like her brain can't process that this creature, one, had even seen her. They barely had their head up in the window. But that it stood on its hind legs, that it was so big. What are they doing? Sitting in a row right on the outside of the house waiting for us? What's going on here? And so Shelly tells Chelsea, "Get in your bed, don't go to your windows, don't leave this room." And that's when Shelly also remembers that she hasn't heard her 2 dogs. and she's worried they might be outside. And so she starts quietly walking all along the top floor looking for her dog. She's calling to her 2 dogs, and they don't come out. Goes into the master bedroom and finds her 2 dogs hiding in the corner of the room next to
Oh
each
no,
other.
they're scared.
Like they're startled by whatever it is outside. Meanwhile, Eric was pacing downstairs thinking he
outside.
needed to go to the barn and he needed to get his guns to protect the family. But he knew that between his own disability, he can barely walk very fast, and he'd have to unlock the barn, and then he'd have to pull down the gun case, unlock that. All the while, he's
Jeez.
exposed to these animals that are out there. And so the next best thing in his mind is maybe he could run outside, get in his truck, and back the truck up to the front door, and then he could get his wife and his daughter to come out, jump in the car,
why
and
would
they
you
could
do
drive
that?
away. So
You're
he just goes to the window and
safe
he
in your
pulls the
house.
blinds aside to look outside, and those 5 creatures are now gone. They're not sitting on the gravel path right in front of the house. He doesn't know where they are, but they're not in front of the house. And so he closes the blinds and he's like, well, I don't know where they are. It's too dangerous to go out there. He starts pacing some more and he goes back to look, and he sees them back in the field where they first saw them, all 5. He can see all 5. They're facing the house still, but he can see them because the moon has now popped through and he's got illumination on the field, and he can see all 5. And he's like, okay, maybe if I just keep my eye on them, I can open the door, run out, get the car, back it up without them seeing me. And so without telling Shelly, he opens the door
my God.
and he goes onto the front porch and he sees them out in the field. He's got a good line of sight on them. Quiet as he can, he walks down the steps and he makes his way over to his truck, which is about 10 meters away. And as he's getting closer and closer to his truck, he's got his eye on the creatures that are in the field. They haven't moved. They apparently haven't seen him. He gets to the driver's side of his truck and he's got his keys out and he's kind of fumbling.
You're
to
not safe
hit
in the
unlock
car.
button,
I don't
and then
get
his
it.
motion sensor light kicks on. And he's so on edge being out there. When the light kicks on, he drops his keys because he's so startled. And the first thing he does, he looks towards the field and he sees that one of the 5 creatures is now standing on its hind legs looking at him directly. Before he even bends down to get his keys, he sees them all running towards him. He reaches down, he grabs his keys, he runs back to the house as fast as he can, and he gets inside and slams it right as he can hear them crossing the gravel right in front of the house. And he hears them bound onto the porch and start running around the wraparound porch. He's too scared to even look in the window, so he ducks down to get out of view. Shelly, who is upstairs, can hear everything going on, and she yells, Eric, what's going on? And he goes, stay up there, stay up there. Shelly,
That guy
Eric,
is crazy.
Chelsea, everyone's just frozen.
I'm sorry, you guys. Of course, the car doesn't work. He dropped his keys because he got scared, so he didn't even get a chance to get in his car. Sorry, I'm behind on the messages. I would put my face inside, look back, missing my face. There's a tiger in there. It's not friendly. Nice suspense in the story. Yeah. The mystery of the belly button. Why are you so full of fluff? What? It's the Ashling slasher. Right? I'm good, how are you? I'm good, thank you, Deadly. Is this real or fake? It's real, supposedly. These are real stories. Casey, can you say red bulb, blue bulb 5 times fast? No, why would you leave the stream along? It seems fake. These are real. Like, this happened practically twice with the Skinwalker Ranch story, and but yeah. Yeah, rip. He didn't even get in. He dropped his keys. Yeah. Shelly yelling at the worst time possible. Damn it, Shelly. Even if he did, it wouldn't have worked, right?
Waiting, knowing that these creatures are right on the other side, walking along his wraparound porch. And after a while, he hears the footsteps of these creatures leave the porch and go back onto the gravel area. And at some point, he pokes his head up and he looks, and all 5 are sitting there just facing the house, waiting for them to come out of the house.
They don't have cameras.
And so he scurries up the stairs to where Shelly and Chelsea are, and they just are so scared. So they decide they gotta call the police. If nothing else, the police will drive up, and their vehicle might scare away these creatures. But on the phone, Shelly lets on that what they're really scared about is something on their property. In fact, it's 5 creatures, things running around outside their property. And immediately the police officer who's responding to this, he's like, all right, well, are you sure it's not a moose? Are you sure it's not a bear? And finally she's like, no, can you please just come over here? And he's like, listen, ma'am, just keep your door shut, keep your windows shut, and I'm sure it'll be fine. And ultimately, that's how the call ends. They're on their own. The family felt helpless.
That's
and
so
Eric especially
messed
felt really
up.
frustrated because he can't protect his family. He doesn't have a weapon. He can't get to his vehicle. They're just trapped. And so they decide the only thing we can do is barricade ourselves inside of the house. And so for the next 30 minutes, they put heavy furniture in front of all the doors and the windows. They blocked everything as best as they could. They got kitchen knives and they got an axe that they had inside to chop some wood. And so they go upstairs, they lock themselves in the master bedroom with their weapons and their dogs. And they get on the bed and they just decide all we can do is wait until the sun comes up. During the time they were barricading their house, they would look out from time to time and they would see the 5 creatures just sitting on that gravel area right in front of their house, just waiting for them. When they finally went upstairs and barricaded themselves in that room, they immediately heard the creatures move off of the gravel. And they heard a couple of them at least walk onto the porch and start pacing around the porch. And it's totally silent besides the sounds of these creatures. And they were clearly communicating with each other. They were bumping into walls and then they were howling at each other. There was clear communication happening where they were trying to coordinate some sort of attack on the family. Now, the way the house was set
You guys think that these things are somehow related to the aliens? Because the Skinwalker Ranch story is similar. You should listen to it. Alrighty, Deadly. I will. If you can say Red bulb, blue bulb fast, try to say it. I bet you can't say it 5 times. Red bulb, blue bulb. I can't even say it regularly, so I can't.
up is there was a second floor roof, and then
It's
the
not
first floor was a
baked
little bit
in.
wider than the second floor and had its own kind of separate roof. And after a while, the creatures stopped walking on the porch. They left the porch and it's just silence. And then they would hear them jump onto that first roof. The scary thing about this is that if you walked around the roof, you could actually look into the second floor windows. And so they're laying there and periodically they'd be looking out their window. There was windows on either side of the room they were in, but there was a thin curtain between them and the window. And so from time to time, these creatures would walk past their windows and they would stop, they'd put their paws up onto the window and they would look inside. But there was a very thin sheet between them and the glass, so they couldn't see the creature, and the creature couldn't see them. All night,
Sounds
they're
like
listening to
Resident
these
Evil
creatures
story.
running around.
Right.
And sometimes they'd hear
Lorenzo,
really loud
how are you?
scratching, like they had figured something out and they were trying to burrow their way into
Is it
the
phased?
house. But after a whole night of this, they never actually broke the glass. They never got inside the house. As the sun started to come up in the morning, the creatures jumped off the roof and they could hear them running away. And for about an hour, they didn't hear anything outside. The sun's come up and they felt safe again. And so they left their room, they go downstairs, and they finally open it up, and all over their property are signs of huge creatures that had been on their property. Massive footprints with huge claws at the end. They found tufts of hair that had gotten caught on fence posts. And even scarier is they found all these points on the house, in particular on the second floor when they were walking on that roof, where there was clear markings that they had tried to burrow into the house. There were these deep-seated scratch
Oh my god. JJ, thank you so much for the $5. How's it going? I'm good, how are you? Thank you so much, JJ. Deadly doggos, right? Well, he's telling the story, Deadly. So it's not his story, but like somebody else's. It's true, Deadly. Thank you so much, JJ.
into the side of the
Thank
house.
you. How are
The
you?
front door had been scratched apart. I mean, it was very clear that whatever these creatures were, they were trying to get into the house, but they had just been unsuccessful. This experience was so traumatic for the family that they sold the house and they moved very quickly after that. And they have not experienced anything like that since they left.
Oh my god.
So what do you think those creatures were? Was that a bear, a wolf, or something else? Let me know in the comments what you think, and I will get back to all the early commenters. So get in there
Right,
and give
they
me your
should
best
just
theory.
throw
If you enjoyed this video and
chocolate.
you haven't done this already, please waterboard the like button and subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct
Why would a black bear want to go inside of your house and kill you? And black bears are like small. These things were huge and they would stand up and like. Right, Svexen, but I think maybe they're not smart enough to know that they can break through the window or whatever. But in the Skinwalker Ranch, the whole a whole team of scientists went and they saw these things, so they weren't lying, and this is very similar to what happened to them. Story. The story that inspired the creation of the Resident Evil village sounds familiar. Looking for a Coke, maybe. Oh my gosh. Alrighty. What shall we watch next? They weren't being drafted by the Lakers. If animals ever figure out glass is breakable, we're in trouble. That's true. Okay, which one? Which one? If it was a brown bear, the bear would have broken down the door 100%. But the thing is that animals are usually... You can, like, kind of... First of all, like, they're not blind. And they live in the forest, practically. So they know what a bear looks like. So why would they say it was something else? And there's usually not 5 grown bears together. You know? I don't think they go looking for humans to eat. Disturbing footage? Alrighty.
What's up, guys? Mr.
No
Ballin
TikToks.
here. You probably know me from
hate
TikTok,
TikTok.
where I tell scary stories.
That's funny you just said it. Some of them are funny though, but it was dark, remember? But they all saw the same thing. There was, like, she had a flashlight.
Kind of interesting, true crime stories, that kind of thing. Better at creating the videos. I will try to do more. This case is not new. It's been covered a ton on YouTube, on Reddit. I mean, it's everywhere. But the reason it's so popular, or I should say it's drawing so much interest, is because there's this fascinating video
Some things are
goes
funny.
with the case. Basically, Lars, who disappears, we see his final moments on
Why don't you like it a lot? It was a dark and stormy night.
on a closed circuit TV camera at an airport, and there's
Okay, I'm gonna
multiple
eat.
camera angles. It's right in
So,
front of you. It's
going
not
to
hard
be
to see what
small.
he's doing. There's multiple witnesses. There's so much information around kind of what led
Giant
up to
plate of
this.
pasta.
From doctors, from his friends,
Maximum
and there's this
content
video.
on
Like, there's
TikTok
just
is
so much
cringe.
information, and no
I
one
guess it
knows
depends,
what
like, what you
happened
look for.
or where he is. So let's dive in. On June 30th, 2014, Lars Matank and 4 of his friends, these guys are all in their 20s, they left northern Germany, where they were all from. They lived, they worked there, and
React
made their
to
way to
what's
Bulgaria. They were staying at a very popular seaside resort called the Golden Sands, and they were just going to have a nice vacation, a nice week-long vacation. They get there, they check into their hotel,
I'll write
and
it down.
promptly begin to relax. And everything is going great. They're, going to the clubs, they're going to the beach, they're eating good food. I mean, it's going the way they had hoped it would go until the end of the trip. So on one of the
Cringe.
last days of their trip, July 6th, Lars is at a local bar and they're watching a soccer game. And something happens where Lars basically voices his interest in one team, and the locals that were in the bar, they were supporting the other team. And so they start, arguing, but it escalates really quickly. It turned into a
What's the
full-blown
videos
thing. His
about,
friends come in, they
Deadly?
pull him out. There was no physical violence in the bar. It was just an altercation that could have gone to blows, but it didn't. Later that night, Lars and his friends, they're getting ready to shut it down for the night, and they go to a McDonald's. And so Lars doesn't want to go in, so he stays outside, and his 4 friends go in to get some food. When they come out, Lars is gone. And so they're sitting around waiting for him, and he's nowhere to be found. And they'd say, okay, well, maybe, he went back to the hotel. Perhaps he just wanted to crash early. So they go back to the hotel, and he's not there. And so they kind of are faced with this decision of like, well, what do we do? And they're like, well, he's an adult. I'm sure he's fine, and I bet he'll turn up soon. So they just kind of write it off and say, Lars will come back. And so they go to bed. When they get up, Lars had returned, and he had this kind of bizarre story about why he was missing. He said that this group of men who he thought were either Russian or locals, so Bulgarians, had attacked him, and he was convinced that they had been sent after him by the people he had been fighting with in the bar over that soccer game, that they had ordered a hit on Lars. And that was his whole story. And so, his friends are looking at him and they're like, why did you leave? If you had been fighting with them, wouldn't it have occurred like right outside the McDonald's and we would have come out and found you? Like, you had to have gone somewhere for this to happen, or they had to like entice you to go somewhere to leave the McDonald's. And then like, how long did this attack take? Because this is like, midnight, let's say they're at McDonald's and you're not back at the hotel for, 4, 5, 6 hours. Like, the time.
You've heard of this story, Vexen?
Didn't make any sense.
What did I ever have?
Ultimately, they kind of decided that, you know what, Lars just had a weird night. He's back now. He is safe.
But he came back.
So let's just write it off. He was attacked, but we're leaving here today anyways. Lars said that he got hit in the ear during the scuffle with these 4 assailants.
Why would he lie?
And so just to be safe, they said, Lars, you should go to the doctor. You should just get it looked at before we fly home. So Lars goes to a doctor who examines him, and he looks in his ear, and it turns out Lars has a perforated eardrum. And, at first, the doctor actually suggested surgery, which Lars refused. He didn't want to do surgery in Bulgaria. If he was going to do surgery, he would have done it back home in Germany. And he instead goes for the antibiotic that this doctor prescribes him, which is called cefuroxime. So here's an image of it. You can see it for yourself. So he gets this antibiotic, and the doctor tells him that, flying, because he was scheduled to fly home with his friends back to Germany that night, flying could be problematic for someone with a perforated eardrum, because the change in air pressure as you're flying could potentially make the damage to your ear worse. And so the doctor suggested...
Sorry, Vexen, I was like, that sounds familiar. That's funny. Real quick, favorite Slipknot album or song? That's a hard one. But I don't know, like their old ones are really good. Their new album, not the newest one, I haven't heard that one, but like the one before that. It's a type of cake. I don't know, it's hard. But I don't know, like I think their second album, I can't remember what it's called. I'm sorry. Terrible. The one with like Sick and I hate this because I forget everything I ever knew like at the moment. What about you, Rice?
That you don't fly home with your
Paranormal
friends
Witness?
tonight. Instead, you
Sounds
delay your
cool.
trip home a couple of days, and
Eyeless.
you just kind of let your
That's a
ear,
good one.
I guess, recover a little bit before you fly home. So Lars goes back and he tells his
Iowa?
friends what's going on with his ear.
I was thinking that,
the
but I
doctor said.
wasn't sure if
And
that was
their
one.
first thought is, well, we'll stay with you. We'll stay here with you. We'll all delay our flights, and we'll fly home together in a couple of days. But Lars was adamant
cool,
that he was just
Dudley.
trying to be a good friend and not make them worry. He just said, look, I'm going to be totally fine. You guys take your scheduled flight.
Wait, now I have to look it up. I'm sorry. Hold on. Spelled it very wrong. Slipknot album. Where? Can you just tell me the things? Oh yeah, it is Iowa. See, I thought I got confused with these. The Great Chapter was good too. I didn't really listen to We Are Not Your. Yeah. But what
Tonight,
about
go
you?
home, I'm fine. I'll get a cheap hotel. I'll stay here for a couple of days, and then I'll make my way home.
What in the name? What? That was random.
It's not a big deal. So Lars and his 4 friends, they take off for the airport. His friends
The
go
first
into
one's
the
your
airport
favorite?
and fly home to Germany. And Lars goes to look for a hotel
dear.
near the airport because he's only going to be delaying his trip a couple of days, and he'd rather just be close to the airport. So he finds this cheap hotel called the Hotel Color. And so this is really where
I'm
Lars'
just kidding.
behavior starts becoming
I get like
totally bizarre.
I forget
So around
when somebody
midnight,
asks me
Lars
something,
calls his mother and
I forget.
he tells her that
I-
she needs to turn off all of his bank cards. Like, shut off my credit card, shut off my debit card, turn them all off.
Hold on,
And
I didn't
she's
even hear
confused,
like what he was saying.
right? Like, we'll stay
Sorry.
with you. We'll stay here with you. We'll all delay our flights and we'll fly home together in a couple of days.
JCS? I don't
But
think so.
Lars
Payne.
was
How are you,
adamant
by
that he
the
was
way?
just trying to be a good friend and not make them worry. He just said, look, I'm going to be totally fine. You guys take your scheduled flight
I'm
tonight.
just gonna take
Go
off my
home.
camera because I can't eat.
I'm fine. I'll get a cheap
Peace.
hotel. I'll stay here for a couple of days, and then I'll make
stream
my way
has
home. It's
been
not a big deal.
compromised.
So Lars and his 4
TikTok
friends, they
is
take
down.
off to the airport. His friends go into the airport and fly home to Germany, and Lars goes to look for a hotel near the airport because he's only going to be delaying his trip a couple of days, and he'd rather just be close to the airport. So he finds this cheap hotel called the Hotel Color, and so this is really where Lars's behavior starts becoming totally bizarre. So around midnight, Lars calls his mother and he tells her that she needs to turn off all of his bank cards. Like, shut off my credit card, shut off my debit card, turn them all off. And she's confused, right? Like, she's trying to make sense of what he's saying, but there wasn't really a good reason for why he was saying this. And then he hangs up. And so she's kind of left with what's going on. Then at 3 a.m., so a few hours later, he calls her back. And now he's whispering. And he's clearly terrified. In fact, Sandra Matank, his mother, would later in an interview after this whole case really blew up, would say to a German TV station that through the phone, she could tell that her son was terrified. This was not an act. This was like, he is terrified. He's fearing for his life. But he calls her at 3 and he's like, there is a group of men trying to attack me. They're gonna kill me. And he was 100% convinced of it. She, Sandra, would later say that she wished that she had asked more questions of her son. But this behavior was so uncharacteristic of him that I think his mother just kind of was like, okay, we're gonna get through the night. I'll talk to my son tomorrow. He's coming home tomorrow anyways. But that didn't happen. So finally, after that phone call at 3, he texts his mother a little bit after that, asking her about the antibiotic he's been prescribed. And he's asking her what it is. He's listing the name, which again
Nathan,
is
thank you so much for
Cefuroxime.
becoming a member. Thank you.
Cefuroxime 500. And he's asking her about it like he has no idea what it is. And she's like, that's a very commonly prescribed antibiotic that lots of people prescribe. They gave it to you. Investigators would later speak to staff
Deadly,
at the
we'll watch
hotel.
that
They
one
would
after this
review the hotel's footage.
Thank you so much,
their
Nathan.
Their CCTV
How are
footage.
you? Thank you.
And between the first phone call to his mother at midnight and
Sorry,
the
I'm
phone
eating,
call
so I
at
don't have the
3
camera
a.m.,
on.
Lars had actually been pacing the halls at around 1 a.m. He'd been pacing up and down the halls, and he was ducking into an elevator and hiding. And then at some point, he had left for about an hour and then came back, and no one knows where he went. At 6 a.m., Lars was dropped off at the airport via a taxi, and investigators would speak to the person who rode that taxi with Lars, and they would say that he seemed a bit off. They said that his pupils were very dilated. He gets to the airport and he texts his mother that he's arrived at the terminal. At this point, his mother confirmed that his flight had been booked, and she suggested to him that he should go talk to the airport doctor and just get his ear looked at one more time before he flies home. And I think on some levels, she just wanted a health professional to see her son, just because the behavior he had shown over the past, 12 hours was just totally out of character. The CCTV cameras capture Lars walking into the airport, seeing this doctor, and then I'll get into what actually happens. So on camera, and you're going to see it in a minute, Lars goes into the airport. So his mother's told him that he needs to go see a doctor, and he does that. He walks over to where the doctor is, and he goes inside. Everything seems totally normal. That doctor would say that he was pleasant, but as he was being examined, the doctor looked in his ear and said, yep, everything looks okay, you can fly home. But the doctor would say that it was clear that Lars, he was paranoid about something. The doctor didn't know what it was, that he has no context. But he could tell that something was going on. He was fidgety, he was a little bit nervous. And then when a construction worker came into to the doctor's office, he had on a construction, bright, reflective vest. They were doing some renovations inside of the airport, so this is fairly normal. And apparently this construction worker, was actually working on the doctor's office, and he stepped in to maybe ask a quick question. Lars sees this construction worker, and this is actually, I think this is off camera. You see that he's in the office, but you don't see this interaction. And something happens where, this guy triggers a full-fledged flight response, where Lars drops everything he has.
Alrighty, Payne.
Leaves
Maybe
his
we can
luggage,
watch it
and starts yelling, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, and
after the other one.
out of the airport. This is all
Lars
on camera.
needs
You're gonna
some
see it in a second.
water.
And he leaves the airport. He's just kind of looking around. He doesn't really know what he's doing, and he kind of like jogs his way.
Sorry, you were welcome. Thank you, Kay. I'm good. Just got home from work. Time for Casey stream tacos and Red Bull. Thank you, Nathan. Really appreciate it. Tacos sounds good.
Way across the parking lot, and he gets to a big barbed wire fence. Instantly scales it. The barbed wires don't seem to affect him.
Hope you had a good
and
day.
he disappears into the woods, never to be seen again.
Oh, really? Paranormal Witness has that story? You think? I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense. Why would he go outside?
So since his disappearance,
Uh-huh.
there's only been, one unvalidated sighting of him. It was a year
Implying.
later by a trucker who really didn't have much information about him. He just said that he picked up a guy that was like barefoot walking on the road, who later on, this truck driver would look at the news or something and would say, oh, that looks like Lars Matank. But that's unconfirmed. Other than that, we have no idea what happened to him. A couple theories about what might have happened. The first one is that perhaps there was a side effect of this antibiotic that he was given by this doctor in Bulgaria.
Getting prepped for Call of
But
Duty. Oh, okay,
There's
nice.
a couple huge issues with this.
I'm about to get
The
wings.
first one being Lars never filled his prescription.
long, but
the
now I
doctor,
can
when he
chill.
went to
That's
the
good.
airport, was able to see his records, and he had not filled it.
1v1.
So he didn't have the antibiotic. But even if he had, this is one of
He
the
heard
most
there was
commonly
Xboxes
prescribed,
and PS5s. and
antibiotics.
stuff.
That the percentage of people that have any sort of side effect is absolutely
Johnny,
like
hello,
less
how
than
are you?
1%. So it's possible, but he never filled his prescription. So that seems like that's kind of out the window. The other is, especially if you look at the mydriasis that he was experiencing in the taxi cab with the highly dilated pupils, the hit to the head, he's this ruptured eardrum, that perhaps he suffered like a traumatic brain injury,
Yeah,
a concussion, that was leading to somewhat erratic behavior. And I'm by no means claim to be a medical professional, but typically if you see side effects of a head injury, it doesn't present itself immediately and like super aggressively. It's usually over the course of time, your behavior changes, or at least a couple days later they present. It's very rare that you would be struck on the head and be a totally different person, but it is possible. Another theory is that even
Good
though
things. Hope you guys had a
Lars
good
did not
weekend. I
have
hope
a
you did too,
history
Johnny.
of mental health issues,
you.
and neither did anybody else in his family, that the fight he got into where he was attacked could have
Nintendo Switch
triggered
OLED?
some sort of psychotic break that was
Never
so
heard of it.
stressful that he lost his mind. That is certainly possible too. So weeks turned into months, turned into years, and despite the unvalidated sighting, no one has any idea where Lars is. He was an outdoor enthusiast. He was definitely competent in the outdoors, not like a survivalist or something, but he definitely was not, out of his element out in the wilderness. And so some thought perhaps he just wanted to start a new life, and he ran off into the woods and was living it out there. But the family, the Matank family, they hired a private investigator. I mean, they pulled out all the stops to scour the area and look for him, but there's no signs that anybody is like living in the immediate proximity to the airport in the wilderness there, and there's no body, there's no anything. He's just gone. I hope one day they're able to find Lars, for better or worse, just closure for his family. So that's going to do it. I'd love to hear your theories in the comments about what happened to Lars and where you think he might be. What do you think might have caused this? Please let me know. Also, I'm going to be posting at least one of these types of stories, these kind of interesting true crime, scary kind of stories on YouTube going forward. So I'd love it if you subscribed and turned on notifications. Also, please follow me on TikTok. My handle is Mr. Ballin. I tell a story almost every day on that channel. Also, I'm on Instagram. My handle is John Ballin 416. You can DM me there. I'd love to chat with you there.
That sucks. I wonder what happened to him. I know, right, Maria? If it was those people, then yeah. But who knows what happened? He maybe drank a Red Bull and flew away. I think he was being followed by some people. It seems like it. But why didn't he like go to his, like, why didn't he tell anybody? Oh, it's a new Nintendo Switch? It's not worth it rather the original Switch. Is there anything like different about it? What was your suggestion again? Is it copyrighted along? I think it is, unfortunately. Lars gone in the woods and turned into Swamp Man. He became a Bigfoot. Mr. Ballin is the best storyteller. He really is. Okay, we're gonna do deadlies first. Let's see if it comes up. Is this? This one? Yeah, I've seen Nick's Top 5. I actually saw the new one today. GFam. Okay, which one? This is true. Okay, I'll do this.
What you see on the screen now is considered the first vending machine in history. Yeah, it looked like that. It was a very simple device. You threw a coin and got a glass of holy water in exchange. This machine was first described in the works of Hero of Alexandria, a mathematician and engineer who lived during the 1st century AD. Nowadays, these machines are everywhere, but it's difficult to imagine that they were invented that long ago. In this video, we'll talk about technologies and inventions of the past, which even today can shock the whole modern world. Here we go. More than 2,000 years ago, a powerful weapon was created in China. It could only be compared in power to the Kalashnikov rifle. It was probably the first rapid-fire weapon in history, although people were still far away from the invention of bullets and other modern gizmos. And if you don't understand why it's so cool, well, here's a simple explanation. The more shells a soldier can fire, the more efficient he is. And the Chinese warriors were incredibly efficient thanks to the repeating Zhuge crossbow. The action of stringing the bowstring, placing the projectile, and lowering the bowstring could be done with one hand. If you've seen medieval crossbows, you can imagine that this Chinese crossbow was very different. And thanks to the magazine case with bolts, the Zhuzh crossbow could fire from 7 to 10 bolts in 15 to 20 seconds. But we're talking about the first version, while an upgraded version of this crossbow could also shoot 2 or 3 bolts simultaneously. For comparison, an ordinary crossbow can only shoot about 2 bolts per minute, and the best archer can shoot 10 arrows. See the difference? And all this in the 2nd or 3rd century AD, or maybe even before that. By the way, the Zhuzh crossbow was last used in real battles in the late 19th century. It's not just a crossbow, but a timeless classic. And here's another interesting fact. The Chinese repeating crossbow shoots bolts at the same speed as the Winchester Model 1873 lever-action rifle. It's not as good as the AK-47, of course, but still. However, the automatic crossbow rifle is not the only technology of ancient China that amazes us. In southeast China, archaeologists found a 2,000-year-old working tool. It's a hydraulic hammer. Water plus gravity are the perfect tandem for agricultural work. The flow turns the logs and the hammers fall under their own weight, hitting the grain and crushing it. No electricity, no physical labor, no lunch breaks. The hydraulic hammer can work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and each hammer will hit with a force of 445 newtons. So one machine will be able to replace up to 10 people. And it doesn't need to eat, sleep, snack, or check their Instagram feed. It's very convenient. Chinese craftsmen were far ahead of their time with this invention, at least by, 15 years. For years, the hydraulic hammer was used to crush grain and produce flour. But some centuries later, it was used for metal casting during the Chinese Industrial Revolution. And it's still used all over the world in modern factories 2,000 years later. Of course, hydraulic hammers look and work a little differently today, but the principle remains the same. All right, let's leave China and move on to ancient Egypt. When it comes to ancient vehicles, what do you imagine? Probably chariots, maybe Viking ships, a Trojan horse as a last resort, but certainly not a boat the size of a modern aircraft carrier. Meanwhile, it's a real boat from the 3rd century BC. This huge galley was known as Tessera Kenteris, and it was built by order of Pharaoh Ptolemy IV Philopator. And the ship was so big that some scientists doubt whether it existed at all. It supposedly was 130 meters long, 20 wide, 25 meters high, and was all made of wood. Tessera Kenteris was the largest wooden ship in history. It had 2 bows, 2 sterns, and in fact looked like 2 very long boats connected by a platform. Something like an ancient catamaran weighing almost 4,000 tons. It was supposed to demonstrate the power and wealth of Egypt, and obviously the amount of wood they had to spare. Unlike modern aircraft carriers, which move thanks to the energy of nuclear reactors, the Tessera Kenteris could only rely on the power of the rowers. And there were 4,000 of them, 50 oars on each side. It's not clear how the Egyptians managed to accommodate so many people and make them row simultaneously. There were also 400 sailors on board, as well as 2,850 soldiers. On one hand, it sounds incredibly cool, a whole small town in a boat. But on the other hand, just imagine how crowded it was, and the working conditions of the rowers. Definitely not a dream job. Let's remain in the country of the pyramids and take a look at another invention from the past, but worthy of the future. Some people feel disgust at everything connected with war, and it's pretty obvious why. However, many scientific discoveries were made thanks to the desire to defeat the enemy. Wars have always stimulated technology, and as a result, mankind has learned how to create entire factories to create war machines. And what about the ancient world? Well, not in vain we mention factories, right? For example, let's talk about tanks. Most likely you thought about them when I mentioned military machines. Tanks are like a modern version of the ancient battle chariot. Even scientists are talking about that. In the end, the chariot provided mobility on the battlefield and was not just a means of transportation, but a formidable weapon. But armies needed a lot of chariots, and therefore, 3,000 years ago, Pharaoh Ramesses II built a factory that produced them. The Battle of Kadesh was around the corner. It was the largest chariot battle ever fought. In 1274 BC, the Egyptians sent a great number of chariots to battle, and eventually there were about 4,000 chariots from both sides on the battlefield. Imagine the heat, the dust, and the screams. But let's get back to the factory. Archaeologists believe that it was located in the Nile Delta, and in addition to training grounds, there was a real assembly line. It was about the same as those at any modern factory, except it didn't have a conveyor belt. Chariots were assembled from parts that were created separately, and this greatly accelerated the process. So, if you're told that it was Henry Ford who created the assembly line method in the 20th century, you can argue that it was the Egyptians who did it 3,000 years ago. But not only the Egyptians and Chinese had amazing inventions. Are you familiar with the name Archimedes? You probably are. Even those who are not interested in history have heard about this ancient scientist. In his time, Archimedes made many discoveries in the field of geometry. He was the first to mention some ideas about mathematical analysis and laid the foundation for mechanics, hydrostatics, and he invented the pulley system. Today, it's used everywhere, but in ancient times, heavy loads were lifted only by people, and the heavier the load was, the more people it took to lift it. For example, to get something off the ground that weighed a ton, it was necessary to call at least 40 people. Can you imagine how hard it was to build anything? Wow! But Archimedes came up with a way to make people stronger without any mutations. Only a system of pulleys and winches that made it easier to lift any load. In simple words, the weight of the cargo is distributed on a rope. The longer it is, the more weight a person can lift. And although the whole process takes more time, it can be done with less than 40 people. There's even a legend that Archimedes alone was able to pull a ship to shore using only his pulley system. Hopefully, then he watched a bunch of people trying to push the ship back into the water and giggled. Okay, well, Archimedes and his pulleys, ropes, levers, and other inventions are quite famous. But what if I told you there's at least one copy of a Swiss Army knife in the world which is 1,800 years old? And of course, it's not from Switzerland. The knife was actually created by Roman craftsmen. It includes a spoon, a fork, a knife, an awl, and a small shovel. Everything that a rich traveler needed in ancient times. I have no idea what he did with the awl and the shovel. Needless to say, the metal faded a little and bent over time, but if you could look at a modern copy, then, hell, is there one on eBay? I'd totally buy that. Unlike the usual Swiss Army knife, which is appreciated for its convenience and functionality, its ancient Roman version emphasized the status of the owner. Not everyone could afford to eat well on the road, let alone do it with proper cutlery. Even today. In fact, Romans carried a whole set of silverware in their pockets. Maybe in the other pocket they carried a dinnerware set inherited from their grandparents. Now, let's talk a little bit about construction. When it comes to technologies that were used, for example, by the ancient Egyptians to create their pyramids, there's always someone who believes it's all very mysterious. Surely you've come across these people. They like to talk about alien foremen and space drills. It's really hard to believe that all these huge monuments of limestone, sandstone, and granite were created without the help of modern devices. But to understand what the Egyptians actually used, you can turn to the frescoes. You see this one? It's very well preserved. It shows a man who uses a saw, and it's clearly made of metal. The strongest metal back then was copper, but could copper tools work with stone? It seems that any copper saw would bend, but strange as it may seem, copper withstands. With a copper saw, it's possible to cut sandstone or limestone into pieces. Perhaps that's how Egyptian statues were carved and the pyramids were built. The Egyptians also had drills, which allowed them to make holes even in such hard material as granite, and puzzle modern scientists. You know, I'm beginning to think if I start studying history, I'll discover that there's nothing new in the modern world. Everything we use today, everything that's considered the result of progress, was already invented thousands of years ago. It's just that humanity has managed to forget about all the cool technologies, and now we have to rediscover them. I'm going to study this issue more closely. In the meantime, you can subscribe to our channel, likes, bells, comments, you know the drill. See you later.
How did he not mention the pyramids? Or did he? Oh, he did. Good job. I didn't see that part because I was.
Oh, you see, that's the racist.
Eating. This guy?
Yeah.
Donkey one? What donkey one? Donkey. Where's the donkey? This? Isn't that like a ram? The only Viking is far from Assassin's Creed. I've been wanting that game forever, Deadly. I've been wanting to play it. But I don't have any room in my computer. Am I blind? Which donkey one? This? Isn't that a ram?
Nature has given animals some body parts so that they can defend themselves, get food, and look cool. But sometimes those same body parts can hurt an animal so badly that it can easily lose its life. How exactly? Be sure to watch this episode till the end. We made it for you. Baru babirusa is one of the most unusual creatures of our planet. It looks like a pig, but differs too much from its congeners. Piglet is small, its back is arched, its legs are long enough, and it has almost no fur. These animals prefer plant food and clean water. But the main thing about babirusa is, of course, their fangs. In males, the lower and upper canines grow throughout their life and bend toward the head. It's not uncommon for a fang to grow so much that it begins to grow into the skull, literally. Imagine your tooth bending upward and going up to your forehead. It's not very pleasant. And it's dangerous too. And deer pigs don't like that either. In fact, I think fangs block the view. Fortunately, apart from their strange shape, their fangs are fragile. More often than not, though, they break before they reach the skull. For example, during a fight for a female, or just from time, if you're lucky, of course. Unlike deer pigs, things are much sadder for common reindeer. Their antlers are strong enough even to injure other animals. It's a real weapon that could very well cause the death of its wearer. Male deer fights are common. During the breeding season, they fight for females, and such battles often end in the death of one of their rivals. Most often, he just runs into another's antlers and... But during the fierce fight, the hapless males may also clutch the antlers so tightly that they can't deal with this situation by themselves. The end is very sad. The reindeer can't get up, can't eat, are deprived of the